Hello there, true believers. It's the Wizard and the Bruiser from the mighty folks at Cave Comedy Radio.
I'm the Bruiser, Holden McNeil. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm the Bruiser, Holden McNeil.
That's okay. I'm the Wizard.
It's just that he was doing a voice, and it's really good, and he's very committed, and then I tried it and just abort halfway through.
We're going to try and do something that's like probably going to be brutal, but we're going to try and condense the life and work of Stan Lee into a single episode.
Stan Lee, the man who invented the very first comic book back in 1824.
Nope, he did not invent the comic book.
The comic book movie was first invented by Stan Lee.
There were several features from other characters. Guys, Stan Lee is old as fuck.
Yeah, I can't believe he's still rocking and rolling all these years later.
I mean, he is in his 90s right now, and if you're listening to this, I'm probably an old man to you.
Yes.
I am probably a decrepit, aged adult, and my entire life, I was a baby once, and I went to grade school, and I went to high school, and I went to college, and I moved to New York City, and I grew up, and I'm in my 30s now, and I have a career, and that entire time, Stan Lee has been the very old comic book man.
I had a moment earlier where I was looking and I went, holy shit, Stan Lee stopped writing comic books a decade before I was born.
Yeah.
Holy shit, dude. That is crazy.
And right now, the entire pop culture uber nerd machine.
It is unbelievable.
It is churning, and at the almost like a what's the shiny thing in front of cars?
Mirrors.
Bumper? No, like the little sculpture at the front.
The balls, the dangling balls.
No, those are the truck nuts.
Piece.
The merkin. I need a better metaphor. The point is
The hood ornament.
The hood ornament. Stan Lee is at the front of this raging machine with his like adorable glasses and his like stories and his like little how do you do, and it's almost impossible to wrap your head around because the number one source of information about Stan Lee is Stan Lee himself. He has given countless interviews, hundreds of thousands of hours of him giving talks at colleges and conventions. In every interview, he just exclusively has an anecdote for any given situation. He talks about driving up to Buffalo with Kiss to pour blood into the red ink on the Kiss comic book series in the 80s. He talks about working in his part-time jobs in New York City to earn like pennies so he can like
working for a trouser manufacturer was one of the many jobs he had.
He talks about meeting celebrities. Like he's there. He is a storyteller. He is an entertainer. He is a salesman, and he's Spider-Man's dad. It's too much to wrap your head around.
It's completely insane, and also just to think of the evolution of comics. Throughout his career, comics were cool, and then super not cool, and then cool again, and then very not cool, and then worth bajillions of dollars in a giant industry that is like impenetrable at this point.
He's also had highs and lows where
Absolutely.
he has been the revolutionary that was pushing millions of copies, only to see his beloved Marvel Comics go through horrible financial times. He was
totally.
the publisher and like the Los Angeles guy at a period of time when Marvel Entertainment was approaching bankruptcy. Like it's all these highs and lows, and like to get to Stan Lee, the guy that you think of now, the adorable old man. It's a journey. So let's start.
Let's take it back, all the way back, way back to 1922. Guess what, dog? I share a birthday with Stan Lee. He was born on December 28th. 1922. That is my birthday. Eat it, losers.
Don't be in the same room as him. He will suck your life force to gain another month of precious existence.
Dear God.
And you also both of you share a birthday with my brother.
Oh.
The slightly handsomer Parks brother?
The much handsomer, the big one, the burly one.
As everybody knows, Marcus and I both have counterpart brothers that are far more handsome than we ever will be. And that is we've accepted that.
Extremely athletic.
Yes,
Yeah.
very well liked when we bring them around our friends. They wonder why, how they can network a switcheroo like some kind of 90s cartoon film.
But Stanley grew up the son of immigrant parents, and
Yes.
his father he was a garment worker, which was the style at the time for Jewish immigrants in New York City.
Absolutely.
And after the Great Depression, his dad would always have trouble finding work, and so they grew up poor.
They kept moving uptown. That was like one of the things, a mark of a poor family. They were moving further and further uptown until they were sharing a one-bedroom in the Bronx, and that's kind of like where you get slopped off at the end if you can't sell enough pants in a year. You know.
Stan and his brother Larry lived in the slept in the one bedroom while their parents slept on a fold-out couch, and it's clear that this gave Stan a sense of hustle, a sense of kind of a need for the creature comforts that he was denied growing up.
By the way, born Stanley Lieber, we should also mention. Yes, and he was definitely an escapist. He was heavily influenced by the books and movies, particularly Errol Flynn films.
He will, to this day, mention Errol Flynn movies as an inspiration. He talks about stories of dashing heroes rescuing damsels in distress.
The Adventures of Robin Hood, The Dawn Patrol, and who could forget Captain Blood.
And if you're a tiny babu, Errol Flynn is goateed, smarmy, dashing. He's basically Tony Stark and Doctor Strange.
Bit of a womanizer in his real life Hollywood, situation.
Yeah, he's the type of guy like when he fights, he goes, "Ha ha!"
Yeah.
"Ho ha!" Hee hee.
And he was
Charismatic.
and a lot of sword fights.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. He worked with a very big deal trainer, and like he was well known for these like dashing, amazing sword fights up and down stairs. They fought with his swords.
He worked a series of odd jobs trying to support his own apartment. He graduated high school at age 16 and a half.
Yeah, he did it quite early. He had very bizarre jobs. I mean, he always wanted to be a writer though of a different sort. He wanted to write the great American novel when he was young. And he had originally he was writing obituaries for a news service, press releases for the National Tuberculosis Center. He was an usher at a theater, and of course, as I mentioned before, the office boy for a trouser manufacturer. And there can only have been weird moments in those offices.
But his big break happened when he got in at Timely Comics
With the help of his uncle.
Martin Goodman.
No, Robbie Solomon.
Close,
though.
Martin Goodman was the publisher of Timely.
Oh, okay.
But
Goodman, Solomon, Lieber.
All right. They're all different people.
so here's okay. All right. Let's get into it. Fucking InfoWars.
All I'm saying is that it seems like there's one people that are controlling the entire comic book industry.
Well, here's the thing, though. The comic book industry was the fucking dog shit garbage pile of the entirety of Western literature.
I would call it a ghetto of literature.
I mean, Timely Comics was like the shit pile of the shit pile because it was Pulp Fiction that was like the moneymaker, and even that was just like the dregs for the unwashed illiterates.
Yes.
Which back then you could still read a full pulp novel and still be considered illiterate. And
we should mention, by the way, Timely Comics will eventually be called Marvel. That's kind of the crazy situation here. And he got in at the ground floor. Literally, the year he graduated from high school in 1939, he was working as an assistant at Timely Comics. So, I mean, imagine that. His very first, I mean, he had all those weird odd jobs, but like his very first like legit job in the industry, he would continue to be working with the company. for the rest of his very storied career.
That's how it used to be, man. I mean, you'd get out of high school, you go to work for some guys go to work for the steel factory. Some guys went to go write comics.
There you go.
But you had that job for the rest of your life.
There you go.
One of his earliest, so he was, filling inkwells, shuffling papers, just a general, low-level office work. But, his spark for creativity went noticed, and obviously he had some family connections. So one of his first writing gigs within Timely Comics was a short fill-in story for the still popular Captain America, a character created by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon.
Captain America foils the traitor's revenge.
Which is notable because even though there's a lot of confusion, Stan Lee didn't invent Captain America. He helped Jack, he worked with Jack Kirby and bringing him back for the Avengers, but the dubious claim to fame is that Stan Lee's first fill-in story was the canonical first time he threw his mighty shield.
Through the shield.
As an offensive weapon in a ping-ping kind of way.
And I'd also add, this is the very first time he would use the name Stan Lee as a pseudonym as opposed to the Stanley Lieber. He was saving his longer name for his great literature he planned to write. So actually Stan Lee was his cheap knockoff name that he was going to use for, comic books, which he considered, not as valuable as at the time as the literature that he thought he was destined to write.
It's like how at dorkly.com, when I write a short essay about Overwatch's gay character Tracer, I say this was by Jake Young, but when I make a gallery called 25 anime butts that'll make you bow down to the booty gods, that was written by Dorkly staff. You don't want to use your real name on the trash.
I mean, I don't understand it personally, but I guess I'll just have to ride along on the train with you there, Jake. So his first superhero co-creation was a character named the Destroyer, which was kind of a big time Captain America knockoff in a lot of ways. He had a super serum. He was imprisoned by the Nazis, and he was given a super serum, and now he's just fighting against Nazis as this weird. He's got a green mask and a little skull thing. He looks like a villain. Really, but the Destroyer would actually go on to be used, in comics throughout and brought back and whatnot.
There was a revitalized series that came out a few years ago with, oh God, Marcus, I'm so mad that I forgot the Walking Dead writer
Robert Kirkman.
Robert Kirkman wrote a revitalized series of that a few years back.
Nice,
actually, really good. He ended up doing more writing, and eventually, by some stroke of luck and staffing, he was made interim editor of the comics division at age 19.
Well, his would eventually become his creative partner Jack Kirby, and Simon left in late 1941 following a dispute with Goodman. The 30-year-old publisher decided to give Lee the interim editor job at 19 years old.
Well, again, here, you just said the big boss man at age 30 gave the 19-year-old the job as editor. This was a young industry. This was a scrappy as fuck industry for, with no respect, no legal, no critical praises to be had.
Oh, they weren't getting respect either, or pussy.
There's no roadmap for it.
Yeah.
It's just fuck it. Yeah, see if the kid can do it.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels a lot like reading about early Marvel Timely Comics feels a lot like video games at the time. A lot of scrappy duos, a lot of creative pairs, always the salesman and the technical expert working together. And
I found a lot of parallels, actually, to, and we'll get to that in just a little bit, of the burgeoning video game industry in the 80s and the burgeoning comic industry in the 40s and 50s. And then when comics started to grow up later in the 60s, and then you have that happening with video games in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Holden, I'm gonna kiss you right in the mouth. I have in my notes that the Marvel revolution of comics in the 60s was like video games going from 2D to 3D.
Boom, 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 boom. We are crushing it. And yes, we will congratulate ourselves on our own podcast. You're welcome.
Stay humble, bros. Hashtag blessed.
So, he ends up becoming the editor. He ends up writing about... Actually, he ends up going off to war around that time as well. He entered the United States Army in early 1942. Served.
Now, other famous comic book creators were also enlisted. Jack Kirby famously saw fighting as a young man. A lot of creators, were touched by World War II, especially in that generation. What did Stan Lee do during the war effort?
He was his term. He was called his military classification rather was playwright. Yes, he claimed that he was one of only 9 men that had that classification. He was writing manuals, training films, slogans, and occasionally doing some cartooning in the war. So it sounded like he was on easy street during that time, just kind of coasted through.
So interesting. You're saying that Stan Lee revitalized his comics company the same time he learned how to do propaganda from the U.S. government. Because I didn't make that connection until right now, and holy shit, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Holy fucking shit.
I know, right? And we should kind of talk about a little bit of an overview of kind of what comics were, just in the sense that, we've touched on it before, but it's a lot of sort of perfect heroes that are indestructible, murdering Nazis, because that's kind of what the country needed at that time. They needed these sort of perfect American heroes that didn't have flaws, that were just kick-ass, and they would go out and just whoop the shit out of Hitler and all of his minions.
Within a wide spectrum of stories, because also Western comics and romance comics and did I say Western already?
Yes, horror. Sci-fi.
Yeah, it was
horror. Hurrah! The horrors.
I married a mummy.
Oh my God, that mummy's married to that woman.
Just a bunch of fucking filthy newsies like on a porch in 1945 being like, Willikers, the world sure would be fucked if everyone were ants. Thanks, science fiction comics of this era. Instead of gravity, we have bacon.
So, I believe Timely at this point was now called Atlas. He was only in the war for a little while. He got back. He had somebody stand in for him as a stand-in for that time. And he wrote several different stories, like we said, covering many different genres, horror, sci-fi, all this kind of stuff, and it was getting kind of stale. He was sort of actually at this point considering leaving the comic books industry completely. That is until the whole comic book industry was revitalized in a lot of ways by The Flash. Actually,
Carmine Infantino revitalized what was a very staid Golden Age character from the 30s into a sci-fi kind of like dynamic hero. The red suit Flash was actually a really important moment in comics development. And on top of that, the Justice League, or Justice Society, I think at that time, was selling really well. So the idea of a team book was also really exciting.
So Martin Goodman, the publisher, went to Lee and he said, can you create a new superhero team? Now, this is a cool moment for Lee because Stan Lee is now considering leaving the comic book field. At that exact moment, Goodman approaches him and says, hey, create all new characters and do whatever the fuck you want to do. So Lee, and he was heavily urged by his wonderful, loving wife,
Joan. Oh, wait. Okay. I didn't know we'd get into this quickly, but Joan was an actress and fashion model in New York City, and Stan Lee was a charming publishing pulp worker, and they were from two different worlds, but he had the pizzazz, he had the charm, and according to an interview I watched on YouTube in a documentary, Joan said that Stan Lee walked, they were at a social event, Stan Lee walked right up to her and said, oh no, I think I've fallen in love with you.
Oh no, I think I've fallen in love with you.
So more like us. Take the wizard's hat off and we can talk.
Also, super key, I'd really, guys, just like quiet down, just take a deep breath.
I was being quiet, but yes.
Joan Lee's maiden name was Joan Clayton Boocock.
Good times. I guess they didn't know
so she
about
was
that
really eager to become Joan Lieber.
So is that where Stanley got the idea for the web slinging?
Good times. So she urged him to come up with, to really push the boundaries. And hey, he's got nothing to lose. Let's try something new. Let's just completely go for it. And that completely go for it was him essentially redefining what comic books were at the time. And he started that off by creating the Fantastic 4.
Now, we're going to get into the Marvel era of comics.
Yes.
And the Marvel era of comics is defined by Stan Lee because he was almost like a DJ for a comic book universe. He was the head of the pyramid. Everything that got put out ran by him. Every plot was at least discussed with him. And
the DJ, like the musician type, not like DJ Tanner from Full House.
Never.
I thought that
I will
was what you were
never
going
compare
for.
anything.
I'm sorry, head of the pyramid. I apologize for the interruption.
And there's some controversy here because, for example, Stan Lee created the Fantastic Four, but all those characters and several key plot points were kind of just taken note for note from Jack Kirby's original series Challengers of the Unknown, including the team of scientist explorers, the idea of going into a spaceship and gaining powers, the idea, a lot of people argue that when you see early Fantastic Four comics, there's a lot of weird moments that don't make any sense, like the pictures and the words don't match. A lot of the things like Invisible Woman, Sue Richards, Sue Storm, whatever, being really like effeminate and helpless and like deferring to men always is like, they're only in thought balloons. Like if you see the pictures, it's just a woman fighting crime, but then the thought balloon is always like, thank God the master of jujitsu, Reed Richards, taught me how to defend myself. And Jack Kirby in his later years heavily disputed how much Stan Lee actually inputted how much input he actually had in different stories. But Stan Lee was Marvel Comics. Excelsior, sure enough, like the tone, the formatting, the letters page, the Merry Marvel Marching Society, the letter, like it all had his voice. And unlike other comics publishers that were just a random mishmash of bullshit, when you picked up a Marvel comic, the tone was established.
And that was really very specifically planned by him. And I think that it's kind of infused in we can even start with just kind of what in general the choice was. He wanted his heroes to have flaws. He wanted
feet of clay.
Yes, feet of clay underneath their costumes. He wanted, and I'll read that quote actually. For just this once, I would do the type of story I myself would enjoy reading, and the characters would be the kind of characters I could personally relate to. They'd be flesh and blood, they'd have their faults and foibles, they'd be fallible and feisty, and most important of all, inside their colorful costume bodies, booties, they'd still have feet of clay. He wanted flawed heroes that dealt with normal everyday problems, that dealt with anger management, that dealt with paying bills, that dealt with girl problems and stuff like that. And on top of that, when he was putting these comic books out, like you just said, with the letters page and things like that, he tried to really instill in the idea that these comic book writers and artists were your friend. Not just, some kind of unknown sort of being that was just putting all this stuff out onto newsstands.
But like a weirdo old alcoholic like Wally Wood or something.
Yeah. It was like, hey, this is, that's why he would do.
Now, it was the work of a bunch of weird old alcoholics like Wally Wood, which is why it pissed them off that this flim-flam artist in the sunglasses was getting all the goddamn credit.
He was the first person.
You think Stan Lee knew how to draw knockers that big? That was Wally Wood.
He was really the first person to put everybody's name who worked on the comic book on a splash page up in the front. At the very end, what was the name of his bulletin or whatever at the end? He would
Stan's Soapbox,
right? He would go
Bullpen Bulletin as well.
And it would have news about the writers and about the storylines that they were planning. And what he really prided himself in is that when people wrote into them, they would write Dear Spike instead of Dear or Stan rather, instead of Dear Editor. And that was like a huge thing for him. That was such a big deal to be referred to by his first name, to have that kind of relationship with his fans, which honestly paved the way for the kind of fandom that we have today at Comic-Cons and online and everything. He was one of the big trailblazers of that sort of relationship with the fan base in that way.
In interviews, he talks about how he would visit comic book shops and see that they were holding conventions, and he realized just how vibrant this audience was and how much forging that connection was important as a publisher. Now, this is, again, we don't want to, because this is the Stan Lee story as Stan Lee tells it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Jack Kirby tells it very differently.
Stan Lee has always been the company man. He has always, while other artists were struggling with big publishers for their rights, while other artists were trying to get their, not even just the rights to the characters, just the physical pages they labored over back so they could sell it for a few $100. Stan Lee always expressed empathy, but never made any lateral moves, because there's an amazing slideshow on the New York Times website you can look up called Sketching His Past, where it's all the places Stan Lee lived. And in his past, there's just rundown tenement apartments. And then you can see he has a nice house in Long Island and a beautiful wife. And now he's in a bigger house and with a baby. And Marvel took care of him.
Yeah.
He got the fame, he got a comfortable standard of living, and he was willing to be a company man.
But guys like Steve Ditko ended up in that same tenement apartment that Stan Lee started off in.
Gotcha.
Right.
Yeah.
And Steve Ditko, some could argue, really created Spider-Man.
Oh, no. That's the crux of it, is to treat Stan Lee like he was just this infinite font of ideas. People say that Shakespeare didn't write Shakespeare's plays, but people like the idea of this unitary, star beacon of creative. Steve Jobs didn't create the iPhone.
Yeah. Right.
But would the iPhone exist without Steve Jobs? It's kind of a chicken-egg
And if
debate.
you had put the real person behind the iPhone in front of a panel of people, they would vomit immediately. I'm sure the guy has cum hands and an upside down nose and all sorts of stuff. You gotta have the masthead.
Using the architectural processes we have reduced the battery load.
I made Thor. He got a big hammer. Susie, will you go to the dance with me? It's we are no longer in high school.
My name's Walt.
Walt, we are no longer in high school. There's no dances anymore. We can go to the bar if you want. Just give me the artwork for Thor.
My name's Walt.
Again, we have to temper all this praise with all this criticism, but then there's the idea of teenagers being the hero and not the sidekick. You can trace that back to some of Stan Lee's earlier pre-Marvel creations. The idea of Eastern mysticism. There's a character called Dr. Droom that Stan Lee invented that was basically Fu Manchu, yellow, creepy, racist Asian Doctor Strange. But the idea, he was a white guy that turned into an Asian when he used his magic powers. It was not a very profitable idea.
But a lot of that stuff was, kind of came, but he definitely stood on the shoulders of giants, because, the idea of a kid as the hero, that was, Captain Marvel with Fawcett Comics, as far as the Eastern mysticism, Dr. Fate. So he knew how to go in and pick out the best ideas.
Why do they all have doctors?
They're all doctors.
Who's giving them PhDs? But we should mention all the many things at least that have been claimed to have been invented by him. We've got Hulk, we've got Thor, we've got Iron Man, we've got X-Men. That was all with Jack Kirby. Then we also have what else?
Spider-Man, Steve Ditko.
Spider-Man would be the big one. Yeah, it's Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, also with Steve Ditko, and of course, which led to the Avengers. So yeah, it's a giant, insane. These are all again billion-dollar properties at this point, each in their own right, which is ridiculous.
It's knowing that these characters will outlive me.
Yeah,
is terrifying. It's it's like Homer, not the Simpson, the epic poet, is just walking around doing conventions, and you can just shake his hand and be like, "Oh, hi." He's like, "How you doing?"
I always remember him from Mallrats.
Yeah. Interesting story with.
No. I was just gonna say just that scene where he just runs into him in Mallrats, and even back then when the comics weren't as popular as they are now, it was still just wow, he's just a normal guy, and he just created all these incredibly well-known things. What you were gonna say about that?
I was listening to a panel convention. convention. Guys, I've been real hopped up on coffee all day, and I'm crashing hard. Forgive me.
You want some? I have some cocaine. You want some of this cocaine?
Cocaine?
Yeah, cocaine.
Me gusta la cocaine.
Yeah, straight from the leaf. I don't know how cocaine is made. Okay,
Guys, we got to do a coke cast.
yeah, we'll do the history of cocaine next week.
Patreon supporters get exclusive access to the coke cast.
Cocaine, we'll send you a vial of cocaine if
With
you
such
give money
classic
to the
episodes
Patreon.
as The Bugs and Knives, Knives, Knives.
Yeah. Welcome back to Nug Talk with Holder McNeely and Jay Young. What you were going to say about maybe Mallrats
So
or
Kevin
something?
Smith talking to Stan Lee at New York Comic Con, they revealed that Stan Lee's famous talk about how there was a woman he once loved and she got away. And that's when the anger that he felt at letting her go was the inspiration for the Hulk, and the heartbreak and rejection he felt was the inspiration for Spider-Man. And Stan Lee had issues with the script because he has been married to Joan Lee for years. They're still together. You could see them in a cameo in X-Men Apocalypse together. And he didn't want, he thought it would hurt his beloved wife's feelings. But then he said he took pity on Kevin Smith because his last film had been in black and white, and he figured he could use the Stan Lee bump. So he said okay to the speech.
Awesome. That's fantastic. So I mean, it kind of ushered in that it is referred to as the Silver Age of comic books, right? The Golden Age, of course, was the one we were just in.
Superman and early Batman.
And then the Silver Age was heavily led by Stan Lee as the masthead of it in a lot of ways.
Well, so like Silver Age Superman was all these like backwards asshole Superman. You see those covers on the internet all the time where
Superman
it's
is a dick. Yeah, it's
super
like,
dickery.
Yeah, while Spider-Man was having troubles with Gwen Stacy, like Superman was turning into a gorilla.
Yeah.
Like on a bi-monthly basis.
Silly Lois, you can't drink water because I am the king of the earth now. Meanwhile, Spider-Man's like, fuck, I can't afford my aunt's medicine. Shit. Shit.
And then back to Lois Lane. Superman, you can't let me marry the executioner. And Superman having his feet up on a pew going, sorry.
Yeah. Batman's being like, oh no, the Rainbow Master is back in town and I'm a dinosaur?
I sure are pulling a lot of boners here.
Meanwhile, the Thing is like, I'm unlovable.
Yeah.
Who could touch a monster such as I?
Also, during this time, they sort of perfected the Marvel method, which I found to be really interesting. The collaboration between artist and writer went as such. There would be a brainstorm with the artist and the writer, and then the writer would prepare a brief synopsis for the artist, and then the artist would actually, without an actual script, draw out the panels, draw out all the illustrations, and then using that synopsis, and then the writer would go in and fill in all the word balloons and stuff, which also might be another reason why some of those panels didn't make any sense in Fantastic Four a little bit, because that sounds like a nuts way to work. I couldn't imagine like doing that, like sending. I mean, it makes sense for how you could get quick, snappy product, but at the same time, just like here's all the pictures, just throw the dialogue in there. It sounds like a little crazy to me.
Well, Jack Kirby got to start doing animation work for the Fleischer Brothers, so he understood the idea of visual storytelling from action to action. So his stuff usually like flowed the best, and then Stan just had to like write in like, you palookas are about to get a clobbering, which, to be fair, is poetry of the highest order. I mean, I just got like a heart palpitation just even saying that.
So we've got the success of the Amazing Spider-Man, where we had a lot of with the collaboration with John Romita Sr. In 1966, they started focusing almost more on the college lives of the characters as opposed to even the superhero side, dealing with the Vietnam War, things like that, the elections and activism. They also had Robbie Robertson as the first African-American character in the comics to play a serious supporting role. And also in Stan's soapbox, he's talking about equality. He's talking, he's really speaking towards, the civil rights movement and things like that, which is kind of a huge deal at that time. And then comes Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's potentially what some say is their finest achievement, the Galactus trilogy, which started with Fantastic Four number 48.
Supposedly, this trilogy started with just Stan Lee during the story meeting, just telling Jack Kirby, being like, I don't know, how about the Fantastic Four fights God?
Yeah, essentially, Kirby said, "For my inspirations were the fact that I had to make sales, and I had to come up with characters that were no longer stereotypes. I had to get something new, and for some reason, I went to the Bible, and I came up with Galactus. And there I was in front of this tremendous figure who I knew very well because I always felt him, and I certainly couldn't treat him the same way that I would any ordinary mortal. And of course, the Silver Surfer is the fallen angel. They were figures that have never been used before in comics. They were above mythic figures, and of course, they were the first gods." And note how, too, he doesn't really mention Stan Lee telling him the idea for Galactus. In fact, they each just, every time they describe how a character was come up with, they each say "I," and then proceed to tell how they came up with the character for almost every single character.
Yeah, I never believe Stan Lee.
Stan Lee says, "Galactus was simply another in a long line of supervillains whom we loved creating, having dreamed up many powerful baddies. We felt the only way to top ourselves was to come up with an evildoer who had almost godlike powers. Therefore, the natural choice was sort of a demigod. But now, what would we do with him? We didn't want to use the tired old cliche about him wanting to conquer the world. That was when inspiration struck. Why not have him not be a really evil person? After all, a demigod would be beyond mere good and evil. What he'd require is the life force and energy from living planets."
Yeah. Now, is that more believable, or do you believe I gotta pay the rent?
Yeah, exactly.
So the Marvel boom, the Marvel explosion, now a successful comic book, like a hit comic book, like The Walking Dead, will sell maybe 100,000 copies. During the peak of like the 90s boom, like maybe 1 million copies. Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, The Avengers, these books Marvel was selling 13 million comic books a month.
Wow.
This was a smash sensation. This, again, compared to, we were just talking about the video game
Video
connection.
game thing, and that's so we can bring it back in here. Yeah.
We'll sell 6 to 10 million copies. Overwatch has like 30 million players right now. And that's like one of the more dominant ones. But it's that level of, that's the audience of young people, like people eager for adventure, eager for escapism.
But also what was happening was the readers, and you know, and I really drew that parallel as well to the gaming industry, was all of a sudden their readers were no longer like little kids. All of a sudden their fans of the comic books were starting to grow up, and they had a much larger base to work with. So they started doing stories that were more relatable towards an older audience, which really helped to span so much more of a base. Just like with video games, when you saw video games mature from Sonic the Hedgehog to like Mortal Kombat to, you know, Call of Duty, you sort of like you see the aging progression from Mario to GTA, you know, and that all happened just like gaming, but way back, you know, around in the time of the 60s as opposed to the 90s and 2000s.
I think to get into individual character storylines might, you know, why waste material that we should be like, we should just do a Fantastic Four episode.
Yeah, for sure.
We should just do a Spider-Man episode.
Absolutely.
But as the 60s wound down, Stan Lee's workload grew, and his commitment to speaking at conventions and colleges, because that's what he was. He was the public front of Marvel Comics.
Yes.
Grew a little bit too much, and so as publisher, he was elevated from editor-in-chief to publisher and took on more of a business role. And that eventually sent him to the West Coast, to Los Angeles, where he started wheeling and dealing for Marvel Entertainment.
Yes.
And that's where, like, Spider-Man and his amazing friends, he's like, hello there, true believers. This is another terrifying story of Firestar. And, like, his media presence is heightened even more than before. He is omnipresent. And this is... You can't deny his as a former comic, as a person who talks in front of microphones. Stan Lee is a great public person. He is amazing to listen to. He is entertaining. He skirts this line between like a fanciful creator and cynical businessman in a very funny way. And he was the guy. He was the face of Marvel. If you could not turn on a TV and hear news without Stan Lee being there, being interviewed.
But I feel like once, too, he gets to Hollywood, this is when we get to some sort of weirder, darker times for him a little bit. I think in terms of his creative output during that time, you've got the whole Stanley Media fiasco.
Ooh, that's like, we're going to get to Stanley Media. We have to end on like Stanley Media to POW Entertainment.
Is barbed wire involved in any of that?
Stripperella.
Stripperella. Okay. So in the 90s, comic books got big.
Yes. And by big, he means like the muscles in the breasts got gigantic.
Shoulder pads. I'm mostly talking shoulder pads.
They got She-Hulked.
Yeah.
Toy sales are big. Trading cards, pogs, stickers, you name it.
A little Holden McNeely started collecting a little known comic called Spawn.
Animated TV shows, like a lot of material from that era is really leaning hard to like upcoming movies and TV shows that some worked out well, like the X-Men animated series. Some didn't, like Jim Cameron's never existed Spider-Man movie. But
When do you start calling him Jim Cameron?
because I've been listening to a lot of showbiz interviews with Stan Lee, and he keeps calling him Jim Cameron because he's a smooth fucking operator. Is exactly why that
He's
happened.
trying to emulate, dress for the job you want, not for the job you have. Call him Jim Cameron, and he'll give you a big shot in the movie business.
But Marvel overextended itself and was very close to bankruptcy by the 90s.
It's all those holograms they kept putting on the cover of their comics that cost too much to print.
There's a clip on I don't know if we can. We might have to cut this down, but there's a clip on the YouTube channel for H Bomber Guy called like Stan Lee Kicks Ass or like Stan Lee is the Man, and it's this footage. It's literally Stan Lee interviewing Rob Liefeld and Spawn Guy.
Todd McFarlane, yeah.
And they're creating a new character in real time. And the whole video, Stan Lee is shitting all over the state of modern comics in front of two of its biggest rock stars right to their fucking face. And it's amazing.
But why don't we give them here wires coming out here, coming down up?
They love that
the kids
stuff.
love wiring.
The
Wires that he'll trip over.
Why don't we
when he's running.
Yeah.
He can draw good wires.
Oh.
Does he have a double identity? Is he really a Mika?
And by the way, they're designing Overkill from Spawn.
Count in real life?
Who else could he be besides Overkill?
Well, I mean, what if, when he takes off all these clothes, is he a 97-pound
do you see
weakling?
him taking rough fist? Okay.
Okay.
His thumb. He would have 3 different cannons
Different,
that are facing you for the large kapui. So right here, they could be like missile launchers or whatever. But he's going to have those right over here.
What
And
makes
this
you
guy's
make those
alive, too.
value judgments? Why only 3? He's got 4 knuckles. Because the reader's
And then
crazy.
this-
Why does he have more on that side than that side?
No.
For the sake of our unseen viewers, is this really the type of thought process that you guys go through when you create characters?
Except for we have more than 20 minutes.
This is probably longer than you usually
We
do.
do.
Well, I think I've got to
Stan Lee fucking just shitting on Rob Liefeld.
Oh,
That's amazing.
Stan Lee owns. That's the name of the video. It's so worth it.
So great. So yeah, in the 90s, he creates Stanley Media, an internet-based superhero studio. And near the end of 2000, investigators discovered there was stock manipulation going on.
His partner was found to be dealing drugs.
Yeah?
Doing drug deals. He fled the country to Sao Paulo, Brazil. The rights, like the stock point, he made bank on this corporation. It was the .com boom. They made all these like fast and quick deals with Universal Studios to like develop all these characters into like amusement park rides. Meanwhile, the actual product they were making, I remember these when I was a kid because I loved Flash animations because I was a fucking loser. Was like shitty Flash animated superhero cartoons with like characters like the Accuser, who was a lawyer in a wheelchair whose wheelchair turned into power armor, so he could like get his clients find evidence to protect his clients by cover of night. But these were shitty characters, these were shitty animations, and like even despite all the hype, despite all the media, they were burning money. They like attracted so much investment, the whole thing crashed and burned.
Yeah, it just sounds like to me that he essentially just got too much money to know what to do with from all of his success with the Silver Age of comic books. Went out to Hollywood to try to like do something, break into TV and film, which honestly was the right thing eventually for Marvel and everything, obviously, as we would come to find out. But it was just a couple decades a little too early for it. The world wasn't ready for it. And he just sort of needed to throw his money at a bunch of different things, and it all kind of went belly up for him for a little while. After
He also signed a little contract that maybe said that Stan Lee Media owns all Stan Lee characters, present and future.
Yeah.
Which has resulted in
Stan Lee Media suing Stan Lee. Yeah, that was fucking bonkers.
I mean, whatever shell of whatever crooked asshole actually owns Stan Lee Media just is, they can't like even find a person who actually is the owner, but Stan Lee Media is just suing Disney, suing Marvel, suing Stan Lee, suing his subsequent company, POW Entertainment, which has been more successful and has been more responsible for like the Stan Lee as nerd grandpa.
Well, they created Stripperella for Spike TV, starring Pamela Anderson,
which resulted in another lawsuit because a Florida-based stripper named Janet Jazz Clover claimed the rights to the name Stripperella.
I remember that.
Oh, Jazz Clover?
Jazz Clover.
Oh, is that one word or hyphenated?
Quotes.
And that,
Stan the Man Lee sued by Janet Jazz Clover over the name Stripperella. Also, there was Hef Super Bunnies. There was like a lot. Like
just went through a weird horny time.
Yeah.
It sounds like a horny old man phase out in Hollywood.
He's always working on like various original characters and musicals and novels. Like he's always pitching. He's always selling. He can get a meeting anywhere in Hollywood because he's fucking Stan Lee.
Man, what I really wished was that the superhero program that would feature Ringo Starr as the lead had gotten fully finished and in the can, because that would have been something special, guys.
Yeah, there's always a press release. He's always moving. He's always selling. He's I don't want to say a con man because he's a salesman.
Yeah, I mean he got some stuff over, so it's not like he's conning people necessarily.
And he had a TV show for 4 years.
Yeah.
Like Stan Lee's Superhumans. That was on from 2010 to 2014.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was doing it, and now he just gets to do a cameo in every single Marvel movie and collect what must be just I would say you could legally call it a stupid amount of money.
I would call it fuck you money.
Yeah.
I mean, but like he's getting older. He's like he doesn't do conventions anymore or very limited.
Yeah, at one point he had to cancel a bunch of convention dates to get a pacemaker put in him. I mean, he's getting up there. You know?
In the later interviews I heard, like he constantly complained about not being able to hear the questions on stage. They even filmed a bunch of cameos ahead of time because nobody knows if he'll make it to Infinity War. He's listed as having already shot the cameos for Guardians of the Galaxy Part 2, Infinity War, Spider-Man Homecoming, like way before like the actual filming had been done.
So that's the legacy of Stan Lee.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty incredible, you know. I mean, and definitely we'll never truly know what exactly happened in those offices and who came up with exactly what. And I think we could do a whole nother episode on Jack Kirby and and any one of these superheroes.
It'll be a lot darker.
Yeah. I mean, but it's a pretty amazing tale. I think if you are interested in a sort of fictional take on the whole history of all this stuff, I really loved Michael Chabon's Cavalier and Clay.
It's amazing.
Oh my God, such a good novel. One of those kind of historical fiction works. They sort of recaps all those gold and silver age of comic books.
I think Stan Lee's relationship to comics and nerd culture is kind of like the relationship one has with a parent. You can love them, you can appreciate them, but don't mistake that there's some kind of perfect being because nobody's perfect.
That's the thing. He's just fantastic at putting on the show. You know, I mean, I'm pretty solid. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you're to like be like, oh, is he perfect? Is he not? If you're thinking at home, like, I bet Holden's perfect. I'm guessing like a very attractive woman saying this to herself right now.
Then came the dark times for Holden McNeely when he started stealing bubble gum from the local convenience store to give himself a weird stiffy.
Look, I didn't accidentally spend $100 at a bar last night. All right. I don't know. Thank you so much for listening to yet another episode. We love, join the Facebook page. We love it on there. It's so much fun. Write and review. our podcast on iTunes.
Cannot stress this enough. We know there's more of you out there than have been leaving reviews. Those help us get up on iTunes, and those get us in front of eyeballs. And it's such an inconsequential thing. You can do it from your phone if you're listening right now, and it helps us so much.
It's like the hugest thing you can do for us besides just like finding out what our address is and just straight up sending us money. But I doubt you're going to do that.
That's very hard.
That
Don't
would be
do
cool.
that.
If you do want to figure out my address and send me money, I'll just say go for it.
What's that, Satan? Kill Holden.
But anyways, regardless, just your listening and in itself is wonderful support for the show. So thank you so much. And any last words?
Check out the Facebook group. A lot of fun conversation there. It's one of my favorite places to go online right now. Just a lot of sincere nerds sharing the things they love. Follow me on Twitter at BestJakeYoung.
At Holdenators Ho on Twitter and on Twitch. Check me out every Monday night with my girlfriend for Lexi Loves Game Night, 9 to 11 p.m.
Oh, on the Cave Comedy Network, Page 7 has been kicking ass lately.
Yeah, Page 7.
Really loving Page 7.
Thank you very much.
Let's throw some love out to Page 7. Let's start plugging other podcasts on this show. You know what you should check out? Last Podcast on the Left. I heard that's a fucking banger.
Yeah, it's all right.
Well, anyways, thank you so much, guys. Take care.
For more shows like the one you just listened to, go to cavecomedyradio.com.